really honored to take this trip back in time with two people who I respect greatly. The first being my former boss, and I'll have to say best boss, Jeff Varnes. We worked together for quite a long time, and it was really, Jeff not only was a boss, he was a mentor and friend. So welcome, Jeff.
Thank you.
And of course, our then Congressman, but now Judge Todd Platts. And I will get this out of the way first, Todd, by asking you, do you prefer to be addressed as judge, or how would you prefer to be dressed tonight?
Todd would be great with me. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. And so that gets our introductions out of the way. I will go ahead and share our first slide, and that brings us back to what happened almost 20 years ago. And so I think all of you remember that on September 11, we had the terrorist attack using 4 planes with the intention to really damage our country. 3 of the planes reached their target at the Pentagon and at the World Trade Center. But on that 4th plane, 40 men and women were the heroes of this story. And we'll be talking a little bit about that and about our respective response during this tragedy. Again, we believe that Flight 93 was really intended to hit our nation's capital, and we can talk a little bit about that as well. So where were you? To our 2 presenters, where were you when the events of 9/11 unfolded? And I will start with you, Todd. Tell us where you were when this happened.
Well, Victoria, again, great to join you and all the Rotarians here today. And I certainly have vivid memories of that fateful day 20 years ago. It was my first year in Congress. I'd taken office in January 2001. And so 9/11, 2001 was just not even, well, just over 8 months into my first term. As I did for all 12 years of my time in Washington, I commuted daily when we were in session from my home in York to DC. So I was en route to DC when I got a call from my chief of staff about what was happening in New York initially. As I approached DC, probably shortly after the 3rd plane had hit the Pentagon, I could see the black smoke billowing up from across the river as I was traveling to the Capitol building. When I got to the Capitol, I typically would be in DC from about 10 in the morning till 7, 8 or later at night, and probably was on schedule to get to DC between 9:30, quarter to 10 that morning. It was, as you can imagine, pandemonium because of the attacks that had occurred in New York. Now the Pentagon's been hit. At that time, I don't believe I was aware of the Flight 93 being taken down by the heroes of that flight. And as I arrived at the Capitol, it was complete chaos. There was no plan in place for the evacuation of the Capitol or all the surrounding Capitol House and Senate buildings. Quite frankly, there was no plan, and members, staff, visitors alike were really trying to figure out, what to do other than to evacuate the Capitol building and to evacuate our office building. So I never got into my office building because of them all being evacuated. Could not get through on my cell phone because of the cell phones were obviously overloaded as can be. I finally did get 2 things. One, in just on the streets outside of the Capitol and the House office buildings, finally, by word of mouth, members, we ran into each other, and we finally got word we were to get to the United States Capitol Police Headquarters, which is located several blocks from the Capitol building. And I finally got through on a payphone back to my York office and got more of an update initially from my chief of staff in York, who was watching television, than any update I was getting officially in DC. Certainly tragic news that we were hearing, and not knowing what more was in the works. And certainly thereafter, learning of the heroes of Flight 93 and taking down the plane in Shanksville, fair chance, depending on when that plane would have arrived, I may well have been either in the Capitol or in my house office building across the street if they had not been successful in preventing the terrorists from succeeding in that part of their mission. So I certainly will always forever grateful for the heroes of Flight 93.
And Jeff, where were you?
On the morning, can you hear me okay, Victoria?
Yeah, perfectly.
In the morning, I had gone to the office. We were temporarily located in the old Memorial Hospital building at the foot of Courtly. The night before, there was a fatal accident at the York Fair where the grandchild of Ken Potter of Martin Potato Chips was fatally injured in an accident. We had a first aid station out there, so I dispatched Victoria and two of her colleagues, Gene Wolfe and Bob Straw, to go out and see what our involvement might have been in that accident or helping to save the young child. Shortly after they were dispatched, I had a call from my wife that a small plane apparently had hit the World Trade Center. And I was able to get to a television in the building. And then the second plane hit the World Trade Center. And we knew it was not a small plane at that point in time. So I was a member of the American Red Cross Air Incident Response Team, and we were instructed to call our headquarters to indicate our availability anytime there was an incident. So I did that and was put on standby for New York City. I began my protocols for getting ready to deploy to New York when I got a call and said, New York's off, there's been a crash in Shanksville and we're assigning you to Shanksville. So I departed York on my way across the Pennsylvania Turnpike on a beautiful fall day, September 11th. So that's my beginning of the day anyway, Victoria.
And I'll join you by saying we were at the fairgrounds, myself and my two colleagues, and I share with Judge Platts the fact that I was only 8 months on the job. I had just started working for the Red Cross. I was sent to the fairgrounds to interview and speak with our first aid station folks. I didn't know at the time, and I wouldn't know until 2 weeks later, that Matthew, who had passed away, was the son of my friend. We keep things so confidential that no one knew who the child in question was. And because I left shortly thereafter, I wasn't hearing the local news, so I had no idea until I came back that that was what had happened. But when we were at the fairgrounds, we had just pulled in and we heard on the radio that what Jeff had described as a small plane hitting the first tower. And we, thought, okay, maybe somebody had an accident. And then as we're walking through the fairgrounds, you're hearing this buzzing. And all of the people who were there at 9 o'clock in the morning, you can imagine, just the staff of the carnival, I guess you would call it, you could hear them talking, buzzing. And we didn't know what was going on. And then after we left, we got back into the vehicle. And that was when we got the word that we needed to get back to the chapter house, which we were there temporary because our headquarters was being renovated. And when we got back, we knew immediately once we got into the car that it was no accident, that definitely 2 planes striking the Trade Center was terrorism. And we got back as quickly as we could to find our staff at the time gathered around a small television set with tinfoil on the antennas, trying to make sense of what was going on. And by that time, Jeff had already gotten his orders and he was getting ready to be deployed. And so let's talk about the next step. Jeff was then sent to Somerset, Pennsylvania. And he talked about that journey of being on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, getting closer to Somerset. Now, this was in the days before the smartphones. So there were no GPS. The cell service was abysmal at best. And Jeff, describe that experience of when you were going into the town, which is rural Pennsylvania.
Yeah. When I was on my way over to Shanks, or actually Johnstown, I did call the national headquarters and ask them what they wanted me to do there. And they advised me I was going to direct the job, or the operation. So that kind of changed my whole life at that time. I didn't know what I was going to be doing until that time. So I arrived in downtown Johnstown, and I did not know exactly where the chapter was or how to get there. So I called back to Victoria, and somehow she had a map that she was able to access. So she guided me, turn left, turn right, go 2 blocks until I was able to locate the chapter. It was all a very low-tech operation to get me to the Red Cross chapter there. And I thank her to this day for getting me there safely.
So when you arrived on the scene, one thing that we talk about often is that during this time, people really wanted to help, but there wasn't a mechanism for them to do that. There were a few things that they could do. They could volunteer. They could give blood, because at the beginning, folks thought that this was going to be a rescue operation, especially for the people who were lost inside the Trade Center and also in the Pentagon. And the other thing that they could do is they could donate funds. And you can see here that back in York, Susquehanna Falls Craft created this platter and donated the proceeds to the Red Cross. So this is still in the office, in Louis Appel's old office. That's just a picture of it from all those years ago. And you can see that this fence sprung up immediately. And this was outside the airport in Johnstown. And those are bed sheets. And I know it's hard to see, but they were photos. This photo that I took was across the street pretty much from, I think, where the headquarters ended up being. And people were just so grateful. And they put this huge patriotic display on. And so that was the kind of thing that was springing up immediately once people realized this crisis began. But this next photo shows you what happened. And so Jeff, why don't you talk about does it mean when you set up a relief operation as the director?
The first thing you have to do is locate a headquarters from which you're going to operate. Because if you don't have a stable headquarters, you really don't have the infrastructure you need with phones, internet, all those kinds of things. So we did locate a facility. Then you have to put together your team. These are generally people that you've never worked with before. And you have to quickly assess their strengths, weaknesses, how they can contribute to the team. They all have a specialty. About 99% of the Red Cross staff for this operation came from Pennsylvania, because you might remember that in the early days there were no flights across the country. So we had to depend on people who could drive to the operation. And so we had 2 sites and then 3 sites that we had to service. The first was Seven Springs Resort, where the families of those aboard the aircraft assembled. The second site was the site you're seeing on the screen right now, which was outside of the crash scene, where we set up a canteen service to serve those people you see walking the crime scene, because they came out of the field seeing things that they had never seen before in their life. And we not only had a canteen there, but had mental health workers who could help them through what they had just seen. Most of them needed to talk, but they did not want to talk to their assistant program because they kept records of the conversation. The Red Cross keeps no records of those conversations, so they felt very comfortable talking with us. The third site was the mortuary, and the DMORT teams came in from across the country to help identify the remains. And we had mental health support there as well to serve the mortuary workers. And then Victoria was very heavily involved in the fourth scene, which was where we had the memorial services. And in preparation for the memorial services, that is where Todd and I called him Todd in those days, had a lot of interaction, which I think we both can gain some insight from. And I don't know when you want us to describe that, Victoria.
We'll talk about that in a little bit. The image that
Okay.
you see here is the same day, I believe, or maybe a day or two later, of some of our mental health workers. So on the phone, you see Cynthia Cox, and in the background, you see Connie Knoll and John Ream. And they were, again, mental health workers getting ready to be deployed to go and provide service not only to the families, but to the responders, a really, really important part of the Red Cross response. And Jeff mentioned the headquarters. And so this is a picture of the headquarters at the time that the president called for a moment of silence. And I think every American across the country bowed their heads and said a prayer at that particular point in time. And you can see in the upper picture, Cynthia kind of orientating a couple of new volunteers. And then Jeff, again, on the phone. So 2 phones he had, one was his own and one was from the disaster relief operation. And you can see, again, the technology, it was a flip phone. It wasn't too great at guidance, but it was great at enabling the communications that we needed to make happen during the event. And again, so Jeff mentioned that we had a lot going on. And this was Connie sitting with, I believe, some perhaps family members, just listening to what they had to say, what was kind of going on there. One of the things that happened was there were memorial services. And first they had some community memorial services that happened before I arrived. And so the next image that you see is a photo on the square in the town taken by Jason Plotkin of the York Dispatch, York Sunday News. And Jeff, why don't you describe what happened and what was going on?
Well, it was, I believe, Friday evening. It was in the square of Somerset, and Governor Ridge was the presiding officer at the time. When the families arrived, they arrived in buses. And when they started to disembark, the crowd did not know how to react to the families. What should be our expression to them? And all of a sudden, all of the audience exploded in applause as the families got out of the bus. It was a very tearful moment for most people at that time. And that was just before Governor Ridge had accepted the assignment from the president to be the Secretary of Homeland Security. We learned about that when he was unable to attend the memorial service. We did not know why, but President Bush did announce his appointment shortly thereafter.
This next photo is it's a photo of a friend of mine who was on the relief operation as well, Ginny Barnett. And you can see by the date, 9/17/01, that was actually taken after the services, and the families had come here. This is the bluff overlooking the crash site down below. So I'm moving my cursor. I hope you can see that. Again, this was a crime scene. Beyond this orange tape, no one was allowed to go. But the families came up here. There were also private services that happened up here that were conducted by the FBI. And what the families did is they left memorabilia about their loved ones. It could have been a flight jacket from one of the airline personnel, a favorite hat, a bear. These things here were all left by the family members related to their loved ones. Another thing that they did was they erected a temporary fence, and this was put on the temporary fence by a family member of one of the passengers. And what struck me about this was, as we were thinking about the memorial services, you know, different things mean, different colors have different meaning in different cultures. And so in the Japanese culture, white is a symbol of happiness as opposed to, or mourning as opposed to happiness. And so we were really cognizant about every detail when we got into thinking of the memorial services. They also, his family also put origami cranes into the fence, which I didn't have a picture of, but let's talk a little bit about the memorial services, Jeff, and how they came together.
Okay. As the operation went along, we were beginning to get word from the families that they were wondering why the administration did not come to Shanksville. They came to New York several times. They came to the Pentagon several times, but no high-ranking administrative official came to Shanksville, and they were wondering why. I knew I had to do something about that, and I knew the Red Cross would be too bureaucratic to try to do it in the time frame that we had to move. So I called Todd at home. I think, Todd, it was on a Saturday.
A Saturday evening, yeah.
And I told you that the story I'm relaying now, and asked if you could help. And you can kind of take it from there.
Well, before I tell that, I just want to express my personal gratitude to Jeff and Victoria for their great work with the Red Cross for this tragic occasion, September 11th. But in total, as a community, we've been so blessed by both of you during your time here in York with Red Cross, and Victoria still here in York with the Bar Association, and Jeff, who went on to continue with the Red Cross outside of York. But you guys were just amazing. But I did get the call from Jeff. I think it was like early evening, Saturday night. So this would have been the 15th of September, 4 days after the attack, which had occurred on that Tuesday. And I certainly well understood Jeff's concern and efforts that we had, the families of 40 heroes coming there to Somerset County to mourn their fallen family members. And they had not seen the same attention nationally from DC as New York and Washington and the Pentagon had. So Jeff and I talked, and I don't remember my exact words, but I think it was something along the lines, let me see what I can do. As a freshman congressman, 8 months into my term, I thought, well, when in doubt, I'm just going to call the White House. I called the White House switchboard and identified myself and told them I needed to speak urgently with the President's Secretary of Legislative Affairs, who I'd gotten to know during my first 8 months, and to have him, me be put in touch with him, or to have him call me as quickly as possible. And I did then get to speak with the President's Secretary of Legislative Affairs, express the concern that was arising amongst the family members that their loved ones were being overlooked, in essence, by the administration from a kind of paying tribute and memorializing their heroic sacrifice for all of us by the presence of President Bush, who was remarkable in his words and visit to New York City, as well as over at the Pentagon. The president's staff member, senior staff member, got it real quick and said, let me see what he could do. Our message was, the services on Monday, and the administration, ideally the president, and if not the president, the vice president, or the first lady, needed to be at the service on Monday, and that was imperative for these family members to be shown that respect, and their loved ones be shown that respect. And Jeff, my memory is that it was sometime Sunday, and maybe you remember the timing, of when we got word that the First Lady was going to be representing the President and the administration. And once we had the service on Monday, which it was such a privilege to be allowed to be in attendance there with those family members. The First Lady, I think, was the right person. My great friends, great friendship with President Bush and regard for him. But in that setting with these family members, I think the First Lady was the perfect person to be there on behalf of the administration, more so than the President or Vice President. And her words were just, really could not have been more perfect for that setting. But Jeff's call to me, which led to a call to the White House that Saturday night, and thankfully, quick response to me from the White House, and got the wheels turning very quickly to allow us to know that the administration was going to be well represented, and as it was on Monday at the service.
I think something that was really important that you mentioned was the compressed time frame. The plane crashed on a Tuesday. It was the following Monday that we started to have the plans in place for the first memorial service. And I say first because there were two. With the flight restrictions, families couldn't get there in time. So we had one on a Monday and we had another one on a Thursday. And it was an incredible feat to do this, to put this together under these circumstances for these people. And you're absolutely right that First Lady was the perfect person to be there at that time. Jeff had the honor of escorting her. But how we did the memorial services where we did a tent on the golf course for the first service. The second service, it was raining, so we couldn't do it outdoors. But right here, what you see is I had gone back and taken this photo 10 years later. And here's where the tent was. And over beyond this hill is where the plane had crashed. So the tent was here on this golf course with table, with chairs and a podium for the speakers. One of the other unique things that we did, this was so perfectly rural Pennsylvania. What you see here is we had volunteers sifting some earth from near the location of the memorial service, not near the crime scene. Obviously they couldn't, but what we did was we had them sift the earth in these vials, and each of the family members was provided with one of these vials to take with them because they had nothing. And it was just an incredibly, incredibly moving time. Jeff, do you want to describe a little bit more about the details that went into the service?
Well, as Victoria pointed out, there was quite a bit of decision making regarding what kind of thing we would give the families, and we arrived on the fact that we would provide soil from Somerset County, and then trying to locate a vial quickly under these conditions was a challenge, but somehow our team did it. We also had to make a decision regarding the religion that was going to be represented there, and we had a variety of religions. And we also had to make a decision on candles. Were we going to have candles to represent everyone on the aircraft, or just the passengers without the terrorist on there? Kind of a political sort of thing. And we ended up having one candle, and the audience could have that represent whatever they were. It was one candle in unity, representing lives lost on the plane. The families went to an overlook prior to the memorial service and observed the crash scene. Then they moved to the memorial service, and Victoria and Todd might remember they could not get off the bus. They were kind of just traumatized by visiting the crash scene, and it took a long time for them to even move off the bus. I was concerned for Mrs. Bush and this hardened political operative that was assigned to the operation by the administration. said to me, "This is not about Mrs. Bush. This is about the families. Don't worry about Mrs. Bush." So that came from a hardened political guy, and he had it right. And Mrs. Bush, I think both Todd and Victoria mentioned, was the right person for the right time. She and Mrs. Cheney were just perfect in comforting the families. And one story, Victoria, I accompanied Mrs. Cheney when she went around at the luncheon to visit the families. To a family, they all said they were praying for the president, the vice president, and Mrs. Cheney, Mrs. Bush, that they could get through that. She was trying to comfort them. The families to a family were trying to comfort her and pray for her. And it was an interesting moment to observe. So that's the story that I have for the second memorial service.
The picture that you're now looking at is kind of a collage. The first one is a picture of Jeff and Amy Gabriel. So Amy was the leader of the team that I was on. Our team was maybe 10 people. And Amy was the one, she was the point person to coordinate both of these services. And what you're looking at is after the services, there was a repast held in the lodge. And this is the location, and that's what Jeff was talking about, where he escorted both Mrs. Bush and Mrs. Cheney to the tables to meet with the family members. The photo that you saw earlier of First Lady Bush was after the services were over, and she was speaking to the media. Something that was really unique at this particular time, I think it was the first time that the Red Cross had ever had a media pool. So that means it was a bullpen area that all the media had to go into to share the opportunity to take photographs. It was located behind the people who were seated facing the podium. So they weren't able to take pictures of the people's faces while the services were going on. And it was really just something that you would never have imagined ever seeing as part of it. The speeches were, again, incredibly moving. One of the things that we did with the candles was we gave an individual candle to each person, and we recited a poem that was printed on the back of the program, and each person was also given a palm card. And I have the palm card, and I also have the program. I have a book that I have kept that includes the vial and some of these mementos, including copies of the speeches by the first and second lady. But in this picture here as well, there's a photo that you see of Todd and the president and his parents. And I have that there because we shared this incredibly poignant moment after the first memorial service, where Todd shared that his dad had passed away. And we were all crying, just crying, grieving for his loss, grieving for the loss of these people. It was just an incredibly moving time, I think, for our entire nation. And then the final picture that you see below is after the two services were over. I don't know if this is a tradition, but the person in the center here in the blue shirt, his name was Dan Boyle. And Dan was in charge of mass care, which was all of the feeding for all of the responders and the people as they were at the various locations. And at the end of this, to celebrate the spirit of Americans coming together, in the garage, Dan had set up a luncheon for the responders who were still there on the job. And so that is a picture of that. And Jeff and I are with Dan, and Dan did an incredible job under extremely, extremely difficult circumstances.
Victoria, if I could jump.
Go ahead, Todd.
Sure.
Just two things that you and Jeff had touched on. One, I turned my camera. I think you'll be able to hear me. In my office when I was in DC, and then when I was elected to the bench and moved here to the courthouse, I've got a collection of memorial items and things, but these two shelves here are both shelves tribute to what happened on 9/11 and the heroes of Flight 93 and the various services that I was in attendance at in DC, in New York. And one of the things you referenced is I have here on the display is the vial of dirt that was shared with the family members and those of us in attendance there that I was honored to receive as a non-family member, but in attendance at the service. And the other thing that Jeff referenced that I thought was very moving and well done, as well as a more lighthearted aspect of that service, and I think was an important part of the message. And I apologize, I cannot get rid of the shadows from my office location here on me. But I think you had 3 members of clergy, a Protestant minister, a Catholic priest, and a Muslim cleric, all who were wonderful in their remarks. But the one that to this day I've shared his message several times, many times, in fact, in my district, following the events of 9/11 and how we were recovering from it. And as Victoria, you and Jeff remember, the Catholic priest, I would describe as courageous in his remarks to these grieving family members, because when he spoke at the service on Monday, he told a story of growing up not far from the crash site in a small country town. And as a young child, his mom had sent him down to the country store to pick up some chain for their porch swing that had broken. And he went on to say that he went down to the country store, in their community. And when he got into the store, there was a note on the counter, had to step out for a few minutes, take what you need and leave the money on the counter. He found the chain he needed, couldn't find any chain cutters, so he had to wait for the store owner to return. And he went on to say that while he was waiting, there was a bowl of peanuts on the counter, and he ate 1 peanut and then 2, and pretty soon he'd eaten the whole bowl of peanuts. And he said, shortly after that, the store owner returned, helped him get the chain cutter out, cut the chain they needed. And when he was paying the store owner for the chain, he said, "Well, sir, I want to make sure I pay you for everything I owe you. And while you were out, I ate your whole bowl of peanuts, and I want to make sure I pay you for them." And he said the store owner's response was, "Sonny, that's okay. Ever since I lost my teeth, I just sucked the chocolate off them anyways." The reaction of 240 grieving family members in this tent at the site of United Flight 93's being taken down by the heroes of that flight was wonderful laughter. And the way I felt it was, you could feel the stress being let out of that tent by those family members. And his message was so powerful, in my opinion, and courageous. He's telling a joke, a story in this solemn setting. And his message was to these family members, it's okay to laugh. It's okay to laugh. And your family members who gave their lives want you to be able to go on and laugh. I don't know that I would have had the courage of that Catholic priest to be able to tell that story in that solemn, horrific setting of these grieving family members. But it to me was one of the most important messages in that memorial service, was his message that, it's okay to laugh, and that, you want to move forward. Your family members would want you to move forward. So that service was just so powerful. Mrs. Bush was so amazing in her words. All 3 clerics were great, including that Catholic priest. And even 20 years later, it's still emotional having been there with those family members. And Jeff and Victoria, you and the entire Red Cross team, what you did for those family members in all aspects, not just that memorial service, but in all aspects of your care of them was really so wonderful. and really so much needed by those family members.
I think both Jeff and I agree that only few people were able to do what we were able to do. And it was a privilege and an honor to be able to, on behalf of the American people, show the families how much they were loved and supported. It was an incredible thing to be able to be a part of. The picture here, oh, Jeff, did you want to mention anything about the second memorial service? How different it was from the first?
Well, it was totally different in that it was inside and it was a rainy day and it was in very close quarters. And I remember that there were people from Hawaii who were unable to come. And so using our high-tech equipment, we placed a cell phone next to the microphone so they could hear the service in Hawaii. I'm sure we would have a different solution today, but that was our low-tech solution for back then. But you know, it worked, and so we were able to provide a memorial service clear to Hawaii in that second memorial service.
Thank you. And the picture here that you see is a copy of the invitation from the 10-year dedication of the new memorial. You know, folks have been outraged that other memorials were built so much quicker. And this is where my current life and my past life collide, in that Patrick White, who is the president and chairman of the families of United Flight 93, actually happens to be an attorney. And he's a land use attorney and helped to negotiate the land deal to get this memorial built, among all of the things. His cousin, Louis Nackey, died on board the plane. From what they know, Louis was one of the ones who helped storm the cockpit. They have the voice recordings. They know for a fact that he was among them. And Patrick donated over 1,800 hours of pro bono services to make this a reality. Another thing that I think people from here do know is that Tim Lambert, who's an editor with WITF, his family owned 6 acres of the property where the cockpit had crashed. And he too gave that land over to the building of this memorial. So this was the original image rendering of what it was going to look like. The next thing is just some coverage of us going back in time about 10 years ago where we were. Jeff, there you are. When we went on our last Rotary bus trip. I'll give that commercial later. But this is to show you what I mentioned. These are all of the memorabilia that the families had left behind. Some of our workers there were reading the cards and notes that were left. And this is the one of Ginny again, looking over the ridge where the plane had crashed. Well, that's where you see the difference now. This is the 10th anniversary, what you're seeing here. And these were some images 10 years on, still trying to get things built, similar location, much different now. And you can see these are all of the, over here, what I mentioned, the media pool, it was so eerily similar because here they all are, people from around the world kind of staged together so that they can have an opportunity to record for history what had happened. And there is Jeff and my friend Ginny. Now, when we go back to the museum, which is now open, it wasn't open when we were there the last time. There's Connie. Now her hair is gray, not dark brown, and John. Ginny's identification tags are actually in the museum. So you'll be able to see them there if you do happen to go to see the new center at the memorial. At this particular occasion, it was President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle who were there, and the families were so thankful to be seen and be heard, and that was what you're seeing. So now 10 years on, they're still grieving, but there's a little bit of joy. This is the bells, and again, the bell would toll for the reading of each name of the passengers who died aboard Flight 93. And this is the wall of names that leads you through a gate, and the gate is here. that leads you to the actual crash site. And you can see that there are private services that happen, and luminaria are lighted, and the families have their own private time before they do the public services. This is a picture of, in the mist, a boulder that marks the crater that we saw earlier. And that was the morning of the services that we went to 10 years ago. And you can see a better rendering of it as well. So that is where it is. And only the families are allowed to go through these gates to be on this hallowed ground. And they do that. The other thing that I found when I went back on the 10th anniversary, I just happened to be driving, going to the Indian Lake Lodge to take that other photo. And I came upon this Chief Justice Jeremiah Sullivan Black, who I'd never thought about or heard of until I started working for the bar. And lo and behold, he was the owner of the Brocky Mansion here in New York, and that's where he passed. But you can see 4 miles away was where the crash scene happened. And so on my commercial, I just want to say that for our 10th anniversary now for our Rotary Club, you're welcome to join us to attend a bus trip again in the Rotary wrapped bus by Bailey Travel. And we will be heading on October 16th back to visit the visitor center. Now there's the Tower of Voices. There are walking trails. The museum is open, so it's vastly different than it was when we went there the last time. And so if you're interested, you can go to our website and get more information and purchase tickets as well. So moving forward, where are we now, 20 years ahead of where we were before? Are we a family, a community, or a nation prepared? Jeff, what do you think?
I think we've become complacent, really, as a nation. I'll never forget what it was like a week after 9/11. We seemed so united as a nation, and that didn't last long. And now you all know where we are right now in terms of the tone in the country. Is not the united feeling that we had at that time. And I think we can see from the pandemic that a disaster can take all different shapes and sizes. And it is important that people continue to have their family prepared for any kind of an emergency. And so I think we need to reemphasize the preparedness angle.
Anything that you'd like to add, Todd?
Well, I would certainly echo Jeff's thoughts about where we are today, and unfortunately where we are today as a nation from a unity standpoint. And it's one of the hardest things for me to watch Washington today. And you know, the leaders of our nation, in my opinion, on both sides of the aisle, not seeking to bring us together, but are fine with just continuing to help divide us by their example. It's unfortunate. It shouldn't take a tragedy like 9/11 and the loss of almost 3,000 Americans to bring us together. You know, that we should be willing to work together day in and day out and be able to put, you know, differences aside for the good of our nation and for all of our citizens. And that's unfortunately not the message we see out of Washington today. And that's really is tragic. You know, not sure what it would take to try to turn that around. But, you know, if you think about, you know, not just the days and weeks, but, you know, really months after 9/11, you know, how the country came together and in so many ways. You know, we need to be able to do that. I mean, we're going to have differences of opinion and politics and in daily life, but we still need to find a way to work together with less vitriol that we see today. And I hope we get back to that. It's certainly not the case today, but I'm also an eternal optimist. So ultimately, I think the American people ultimately get things right. And I'm still hoping that's the case in the current environment. So
I agree completely. And I just wanted to add, at the time of the events of 9/11, I owe a special debt of gratitude to my husband because I had a 5-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter. And while I was deployed on this disaster, my son had a fall and broke his collarbone. And my husband said, you know, you need to stay and you need to do what you need to do. And I've got things covered here. So for my whole life, pretty much my whole life, he has been just a champion and a supporter. And I can't thank him enough because his support has enabled me to have these experiences. And it's just been incredible.
Victoria, if I could add one lighthearted message about family and how it relates to the events of 9/11. When the events happened that day and I'm in DC and kind of cut off from communications back home, other than that payphone that I was able to get through to my York office, while I was on with my chief of staff on that call, my mom, being all the more, very protective mom of all 5 of us children, had come to my York office. And while I'm on with my chief of staff, I hear my mom saying to my chief of staff, "Brian, you tell Todd he's supposed to come home right now." She was looking out for her little boy, who happened to then be a congressman in DC. So it's, that family support that we all get is very important, and certainly to your family and Jeff and family, allowing you guys to do what you've done over the years with the Red Cross is truly to be recognized and commended. So,
well, thanks for saying that. I don't see any questions posed in the chat, but if anyone has a question, please unmute yourself and go ahead and ask away. We are ready. Any questions from anyone there? I'm hearing applause. That's good. We're glad that you all were able to be here.
If I can make one final request, because of the events of 9/11 and the tragic attack on our country, we went to war in Afghanistan and to defeat the Al-Qaeda, hold Al-Qaeda accountable, and along with the Taliban for giving them safe harbor in that country. In my service in Congress, I did 8 visits to Afghanistan over the years to get out to the point of the spear with their troops, as I regularly did, and came home inspired by all the troops I interacted with in those 8 trips. But I also had the privilege to interact with countless Afghani men, women, and children. And over the last several weeks and watching the tragic unfolding of events in Afghanistan, I know there are a lot of Afghanis who I interacted with, and one interpreter in particular who assisted me during a trip in 2006, who were still working on getting him and his family out of Afghanistan. If you can keep in your prayers all those Afghani citizens who really stood by our troops and our civilian personnel who were working in Afghanistan over the last 20 years, because I'm very worried for all of them and for what their future looks like under the Taliban now retaining and regaining control. So if you can keep the people of that country who didn't participate in the attacks on us, but are just trying to live their lives as we all do, keep those peaceful individuals in your prayers, and hope the future is a brighter one than what currently looks like in that country.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And Christina Bang just wrote in the comments, "I just really appreciate what you all have shared. Thank you for your service during that tragic time and dedication to public service over the years." So I thought it would be appropriate to recite with you, if you will join me in reciting the poem that we did at the memorial services for the families who were lost on board Flight 93. It's called "We Remember Them." In the rising of the sun and at its going down, we remember them.
In the blowing of the wind
and in the chill of winter, we remember them. In the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. in the blueness of the skies, and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. In the rustling of the leaves, and in the beauty of autumn,
We
we
remember
remember them. In the beginning of the year, and when it ends,
we remember
remember
them.
when we are
When we are
weary
weary
and in
need of
need of
strength,
strength, we
we
remember
remember
them.
them.
When we
When we are
are lost
lost
and
and
sick
sick
at
at
heart,
heart,
we
we
remember them.
remember them.
When we have
When we have
joy,
joys,
we
we
yearn to
yearn
share.
to share.
We
We
remember
remember
them.
them.
So
So
long
long
as
as
we
we
live,
live,
they too
they
shall
too shall
live,
live.
for
For
they
they
are
are
now
now
a part
a
of
part
us
of us.
as
As
we
we
remember them.
remember them.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
We'll see you again.
Thank you for putting it together, Victoria.
Yeah, great to
You're
join
welcome.
everyone.
You're welcome.
Good evening.
Good
night.
evening.
Thank you.